confirm, Chairman, the live stream has been started.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't get a.
No, I'm afraid not anymore.
Okay, that's fine. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee of Herefordshire Council, being held on Monday, 31st of October 2022. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire centre point of the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. And the Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photographing may be made aware. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they are called upon. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Dave Bolter. Are there any other apologies? No. Agenda item 2, name substitutes. I don't believe any name substitutes.
None notified, Chair.
No. Okay. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any interest in any agenda item? No. Good. Right. Agenda item 4. The minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October 2022 are included in the agenda 11 to 18 for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Yep. Thank you. The committee's action log is attached to the minutes, pages 19 to 21, with printed copies provided in the meeting room. So there are 3 pages to the action sheet. And we've got a fairly full agenda today. So unless there are specific questions on an action, I propose that we note this sheet and spend some time with it in the November meeting. And we'll have hopefully a little bit more time to look at it. Any other questions we can take this time? No? If not, I will go on. To agenda item. Sorry, Councillor Jim.
Just briefly, 165 action. That has actually now happened, and my grateful thanks to 151 officer. We've had a meeting and I've got enough reading to keep me going till Christmas as a result. So thank you very much indeed for that early Christmas present.
A good stocking for that. Right, thank you. Thank you for that. So, agenda item 5, questions from members of the public. No questions are being received from members of the public on this occasion. And agenda item 6, questions from councillors. No questions have been received from councillors on this occasion. So we'll move to the progress report on the internal audit activity, agenda item 7. The recommendations we'll be reviewing, asking committee to pass are A, to note the internal audit plan and pipeline of future work to ensure that there's sufficient coverage and delivery to give an annual opinion. B, review the areas of activity and concern and be satisfied that necessary improvements are outlined and delivered. and C, to consider the assurances provided, make recommendations which the report makes, make the recommendations which the report makes, commenting on its content as necessary. I don't know who we've got on. Right, Ian, we've got you on Zoom. Do you want to just make whatever comments you like on your report?
Yeah, I'll briefly run through it if that's okay with you, Chair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to, obviously you've met me before. I'm Ian Halstead, the head of internal audit for SWAP, and I cover the Herefordshire Council area. With me today is Janine Davis, and Janine Davis is my principal auditor, and she will support me. She supports me to be on the activities that we do. So in presenting the report today, and that's on page 29 of your pack, the purpose of that is to give you assurance that there are robust controls in place, but also to raise any significant risks to your attention. So I'll briefly run through the key headlines. In terms of activity, we've undertaken 15 pieces of audit work by the end of Q2, completed pieces of work, 12 are ongoing, and they are either at draft or work in progress stage. So as a result of that, I think I'm comfortable and confident in saying that the work programme is on track to deliver enough work to deliver an annual opinion. In terms of outcomes, you'll see the detail of the outcomes of our work is contained in Annex B, and that's on page 37 to 39. There were 10 reasonable assurance opinions, one limited assurance piece of work, which I'll talk about a bit later, and that's in the housing prevention grant work that we did, and then one piece and a number of pieces of advisory work there. So the indicative results of those pieces of work give me enough assurance to say that there's a satisfactory control environment from the work undertaken in Q2, and that there are no significant corporate risks. In terms of plans, the pipeline of work we've got planned going forward to Annex B, and that's on page 41 to 44. The continual dialogue with and engagement with the council. We meet with directors and we regularly discuss those risks. That's one positive outcome we've had recently, is we met with the chair and vice chair of the audit committee, and that was very positive. We looked at possible areas of future work. I'm happy to meet with any other members of the committee, but I think going forward, if there are any concerns or any areas that the committee wishes to look at, then that channel of using the chair and vice chair is probably available and very relevant. In terms of coverage, I think the coverage across key risks is there. I think Q3 and Q4, you'll see a natural cycle that moves away from the grant work that we do through to more control-based work. However, there are future plans in place to look at the grant work that we do. There's a grant working group ongoing, and the work that they're doing gives us much more visibility and oversight in the activity that's there. So I've discussed this with the 151 officer, and we're going to look at putting a risk-based grants approach to the internal audit sign-off of work. And that will be presented back to the audit committee, that approach and that process for your approval. Meeting. In terms of matters to bring to your attention, there are no significant corporate risks. However, as I mentioned, there were some concerns around some work that we did on a homeless prevention grant by the Housing Solutions team. That was around 2 grants that we did, and the total of those grants is 420,000 approximately. As a result of the work, the council will have to repay back £25,000 back to the Department of Levelling and Communities. I think more so, it's not so much the value of the money, it's some of the issues or concerns that I have, and those are around the failure to meet deadlines. There were multiple submissions, and many of the transactions were unsupported and misallocated, which gave me an indication that perhaps there need to be improvement in areas such as planning and the administration of the grant. I think there are a number of mitigating factors, if I'm honest. The notification of grant funding didn't come until December 21, and the spend had to be in April 22. So there wasn't a lot of time or notification to make arrangements to spend that grant. And of course, we were on the back of COVID. I think going forward, we've scheduled a piece of work for Q3 that will allow us to review the processes in the Housing Solutions team and report back to you as a committee to give you, to support the department, but also give you some assurance that those underlying processes are working effectively. And then summing up, really, I feel confident in giving an annual rolling opinion at Q2 of a reasonable assurance. So there are no significant concerns, and that there are reasonable assurance around risk management, the control environment, and the governance arrangements. So if members have any questions, I'll happily try and answer them.
Thank you, Ian. Committee, any questions on the report? Yeah, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Bolton, first. You are doing that.
I'm happy for you to go first.
Thank you.
You're slightly ahead on me on the grab for the mic.
Oh no, I was just waiting to see if anybody else had questions as well. Thank you very much for that. I have two general questions, and then maybe I'll leave my other question, which is specifics around the pipeline, until other members have had a chance. I guess my constant bugbear, I think every committee, is the amount of grant work that we're doing compared to the amount of other bread and butter internal audit work that we aren't doing. And I know last update, I had the same issue, but I could see in the pipeline that we were getting some more of the bread and butter audits coming back into the program. Yet all of the, I think it was 14 out of the 15 audits were either grant or other sort of other work. So I guess it's, I'm having an ongoing concern that although you say in the next 2 quarters we will be doing more sort of other internal audit work, every time we get an update there seems to be a lot of grant work, and I'm just concerned that we're not, yes, I do appreciate that the grant money does is considerable value, and we've got to allocate internal audits time on risk, but I'm just concerned that once again when we're missing out on other audit work that we should be doing, and I would be wanting either more audit work to be done to cover some of this other work, or I'm constantly concerned with the amount of grant work that we're doing. So that was.
Do you want to comment on that? Comment on that. Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah. Absolutely. I recognise your concerns in the area. I think internal audit sign up for grant. It's a requirement of the grant. We won't get the money unless internal audit actually sign it off. So it is a requirement. It is a cyclical thing, so it does come in more so at certain times of the year, at the end of the financial years, and the 2 quarters after. I think, I recognise that I would like to see some more focus on the other areas of audit work, and so therefore that's why I'm suggesting that we put in a risk-based approach to grant certification, and I have discussed this with Andrew, and he's very comfortable with that. So I will put before the committee a paper that looks at all of the grants that we are looking at, looks at how material, looking at the sign off for those grants, how material those grants are, and we'll be looking at an approach that will minimise almost the amount of internal audit activity on those, but focuses on the key ones. And I'll bring that back to you, that paper back to you, and you will agree it, you will approve that, and then that should give us a wider picture of how we gain assurance around these grants, and hopefully gives you more assurance that some more internal audit act work can be focused on some of the control environment stuff, which we are going to be doing in Q3 and Q4. It's traditionally a way that internal audit work does focus on those areas of activity in the last 2 quarters. So by the end of the year, you'll certainly see plenty of work that will give you assurance in other areas of the council's operations.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I really welcome that, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. That's great. Just also on the grant work, I think almost every internal update as well, we have had a report where we've had to refund certain amount of grant money because of one reason or another. So is there any way that you can quantify how much we've had to pay back? And I note that you have done considerable amount of grant work up until now, and you've identified some weaknesses in the control environment in this particular grant review. How is this different to all the other grants? Are the control weaknesses identified here? You've said that you've instigated another audit in quarter 3. Is that because you think that it's systemic across the other areas where we're doing grant work, or do you think it's specific to this area? Because we've done a lot of other grant work and these issues haven't been raised before. So just those 2 questions, thank you.
Yeah, I guess as head of audit, I have to bring areas of concern. And whilst I don't think this is particularly material from a financial point of view, I think it's important that we understand that there are backline, back office processes that's behind every single grant that we look at. And so I'm bringing this to your attention because I think that the administration of the grant, there are areas that certainly could and probably should be improved going forward. But I guess that also gives me indications that I also need to direct some internal audit activity into the more general activities in that area as an indicator. And so therefore that's why we're doing this. We're looking at this specific area because the grant gave us indications that there may be some improvements that may need to be made in that particular service. So it's a focused piece of work.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. And thank you for that clarity. Thank you for that clarity on the that particular grant. Just a couple of questions. The first one is it's just a typo really, which doesn't make sense. On the bottom of page 32, page 4 of your report. No, not that one. Sorry, let me just find out which one it is. So page 31. Which is page 2. So in the explanation for CRR 63 on the Hereford City Centre Transport Package, in the middle you've got, if this further education was too significant, then it may not be possible to meet the objectives. So I'm suspecting that it's not education that we need in there, because the sentence doesn't make sense. So that's just a bit of an aside.
Expense.
Yes, you probably should be.
I suspect it's expense as too significant, but if we just note change to that word, expense for education, or any other suggestion you have, but expense kind of fits. It's CR 63. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And so my question is around that list of audit activity we've got starting from page 41, which is page 12 of your report. Just for clarity, is this do you see this list as kind of in priority order? So obviously we're just talking about housing solutions grant, and we've got that at number 2. So is this a sort of priority list, or is this a list of planned audit work that will be picked up regardless of where it is on the list? Because I'm just conscious of the fact that some of these have been on the list for quite a long time, and so it's just trying to understand your approach to scheduling which of those audits you've taken in which order? Thank you.
Can I respond to that, Chair?
Please do, yeah.
Yes, that list of work, those lists of items in the pipeline, they aren't in any specific order. That list of pipeline is not ranked. They're not ranked in any way. But what happens? They're under constant review, and we push things into the plan status as we think that they represent significant risks. There are a number of other factors, like coverage in certain areas, if we need to extend the coverage in certain areas, or the availability of the service to do the audits as well. So it constantly moves, and there will be things on there that have been on there for some time, and we probably need to review those and determine whether they still should be on there. But they were put on there because they were a risk. But I suppose, in answer to your question, they're not ranked in any way. It's just an indication of those ones that are planned, as in page 41, and those areas that may rise up into the area of audit work, because we feel there is a need there, because there are risks there. Other things will come on and replace those, or go to the top of that list. But there's no ranking at the moment.
So thank you for that. And I wonder, with coming into I suppose towards the last quarter of the year, whether or not some indication, maybe from the dates when they became an item of interest to audit, might be an idea, so that, I don't know, Tim, is there anything that we want to do about looking at this list and putting audits, committees, idea of which ones they'd like to see come forward?
I think if any committee members, all the items I think are interesting and represent a risk. So it is quite difficult without specialist knowledge, I would say, to quantify that risk in order to prioritise. But if any committee member wants to bring any particular item to me, I'm happy to discuss that with both head of internal audit and the 151 officer as to whether it should be given extra priority. I think that's quite reasonable. And indeed, if there's other things which aren't in this list as well, if there's an item that the committee member thinks is should be looked at by internal audit, very occasionally I come up with some ideas that we put them forward, because essentially internal audit do the work as agreed with us as committee, so we agree prioritisation ultimately. Thank you. Councillor Jim.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to come back on Councillor Bolton's comment, or the background to that. I thought it was rather important that the statement was made that when we get grants, part of the process is that there's an audit process built in, and it has to be done. It's very evident that there's look back at it over the last few years, the way in which this particular central government has worked has been by grant. Increasingly, there's grants for this, grants for that, grants for everything. So the whole structure and the way in which we've got to look at these things requires us, therefore, to keep on adding more audits in to match up to the grants that are supplied. And I presume, and this is where really a question more to 151 officer, I presume your workload is actually markedly being altered by the nature of having to deal with so many different bits of grants and making sure they're fit for purpose and hit the right target. And I noticed the comment that was made by him that 4 months is not a long time to deal with these things, to set them up and do it. It sounds very nice when a grant's made and offered and taken, but the timeline to actually do the background work that's needed to distribute it and make sure it's done properly, it clearly must be proving some sort of difficulty. So I suppose my question in a way is the structure of the organisation now having to change in order to match the nature of the change that government is imposing, and is that putting stresses and strains? And then in a way to Ian, I'm bound to ask, is this happening with other councils? Swap, you deal with quite a few other councils, and I think it'd be interesting to know if the same sort of problems being experienced elsewhere, and the same way in which you're making comments to us about the audits and the numbers you're doing and the nature of them, whether you're finding this is now a common pattern, or whether we stand out in any particular direction as being rare and unusual, and particularly Herefordshire.
So, Andrew, I don't know if you want to comment first, and then I'll pass to Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the organisation is changing to cope with the way that money flows from government to the council. So a lot of the bigger grants, so we've got Stronger Towns, 22.4 million. We have Shared Prosperity, £8 million, and there's a further 1.7 million for rural elements of that. We put a levelling up bid in. So these big schemes are being run through and helped by the PMO function, with serving as projects in their own right, distributing £22.4 million of public money through a range of partners. It's quite a complicated process. So the organisation has changed and is continuing to change on that front. I agree with your comments about the time frame. We are presented with almost an impossible challenge on some of those grants. Money is allocated, and you've got 3-4 months to deal with it. And certainly during the COVID phase, we received the money, instruction how to spend it, but the actual grant instruction could be 3-4, maybe longer weeks before we actually get that. So there is quite a challenge in there. But as Ian said, we're looking at a risk-based approach, how to best use the swap resources and how the council operates. But it is very much a marked change from Westminster. But any new money for local authorities does come with a wrapper of a grant, and government then impose an audit requirement on that.
Can I just follow then? Is the, just thinking in terms of governance functions here, is there anything that is required by your department to actually meet that requirement? Are we actually moving in the right direction to achieve that? Is this a question of hiring relevant people, or is it software related? I mean, is there anything that is required to ensure we meet this new way of working?
Chair, yes, and that's partly what the skill set within the PMO. So people with very strong project management experience, managing programs. At the end of the day, a lot of these things, if you've got to spend money well in a short period of time, you have a very clear plan at the beginning, making sure people stick to that, and the report exceptions go through change control. So that has been changing. And we are employing more project managers with a recognised project management qualification than we were, saying 5 or 10 years ago. So that has been quite a change in how the officer cohort has changed within the council.
I don't know, Ian, if you want to comment on whether Herefordshire is in any way different from other authorities in this regard. I suspect not. But,
Yes, certainly, Chair. I mean, across all of our partners, there is pressure on the internal audit service to deliver more and more grant certifications, and I've seen that. What I can't say is about the results of those certifications, and to tell you whether Hereford is better, poorer, or the same as the others, but I can find out for you probably. So I'm happy to report back to the committee to find out how you're positioned in terms of the certification of grants in relation to all of our other partners, if the committee would like that.
I think that would be very useful, because I think we can then possibly learn from others if there are others that are better than we are. I mean, this is a learning process, as has been implied by the 151 officer just now, that it's something we've got to adapt to and change to. Well, that's likely to be for the foreseeable future, certainly under the current central administration. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Bolton, did you have a further question? And then we'll
Thank you, yeah, I just have 3 sort of more detailed questions on the pipeline, Ian, if that's okay. The first one on page 39 is the audit around, so page 39 of our pack, I think page 10 of your report. Public health, there's a audit that you're at draft stage. I'm just conscious that, and I wanted to raise it now in case you weren't here later on in the very end of the meeting when we talk about corporate risk register. I know there's a new risk 73, which is removal of ring fence around public health budget. And I might be asking you, Andrew, when we get to corporate risk register what that means, because I don't quite understand it. But one of the controls, Ian, was that SWAP doing an audit on, SWAP audit being undertaken on grant during the summer 22. And as it's a control for that risk on the corporate risk register, I'm assuming it is this public health internal audit. So my question to you is, A, is my assumption correct? And if so, are you able to, I know it's only at draft status, but are you able to make any comments so we can understand it better when we move to the corporate risk register and talk about risk number 73? Please.
Yes, certainly. It is aligned to the risk register work. And in terms of comments, I think as it's still in draft, I'm not sure I can make any comments at this stage. If that, I'm happy to talk about that at the next meeting, but at this meeting, I think it's probably too early at the moment.
Okay. My next question then is around page 43, the ICT governance framework review. I guess more recently we've had some comments from Alan of Brazil, I think, about some deficiencies in our systems and data to produce meaningful KPIs. I'm conscious that we had no KPIs in our budget papers that came, quarter one papers that came to Cabinet. So I just wanted to understand the scope of this particular project and whether it will be drilling down into some of those areas, or whether that's something that I should be flagging as a potential future audit.
Yes, certainly. The framework review is being delivered by our expert team. It looks at all aspects of IT operations. It's a helicopter view of that. Obviously, you know, in terms of data and data quality and performance management, it will only touch on those areas. What I can't, so I'm happy to expand. You know, it's in progress again at the moment. I'm happy to expand and send you the scope of that review if that would help you understand that. And when it comes to fruition, happy to present that to the committee. In terms of data and data quality, we are implementing a new process to look at data maturity in the council. So every piece of audit work that we're doing from now on, we're looking at the quality of that data, and that will then build a picture that by the end of the year, I'll be able to present a report to you showing what your data maturity is like. So, you know, what is the quality of that? You know, is it giving you good performance information? So that's a process that we're building in now, and I'll report to you on that by the end of the year. I know that's not specifically related to the IT piece of work, but the IT piece of work is the more technical side rather than the data side. It's not an information governance audit, it's a technical IT audit.
Yeah, because I guess one of my big concerns is that, you know, we are so technically, we are so dependent on technology, and it influences everything that the council does, yet our internal audit plan doesn't have a lot of IT specific audits within it. So I guess that was one of my concerns that I just wanted to flag. And particularly as we're getting external into our organisation and highlighting that perhaps our IT offerings are not as good as potentially what they could be. My last question was on, I know, the annual governance statement, which is also part of this agenda pack. It talks about, in principle, I think it's F, continuous improvement. There's an audit or review of teams using corporate service planning tool. I think that's on page 15 of the supplement. And I'm not quite sure if this is a question for Andrew or Ian, but is that audit or review in the pipeline, or is it being done by SWAP, or maybe Rachel, or is it an audit been undertaken by officers? Because I don't see anything specific in the audit pipeline that would cover that.
I don't think it's actually in the audit, swap audit pipeline. We're doing that internally as a group of officers to see what that comes through. If we need to escalate it to our swap to have a look, we'll certainly do that. I'm hopeful we'll have a good outcome.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. If I've no more comments or questions, I think we've discussed the pipeline of future work. We understand better how the prioritisation is considered for the items which are not yet planned. And I've suggested the committee highlight any specific areas that they want to bring forward, or any other areas that they'd like to see coming into the pipeline. We've reviewed the areas of activity and concern that we're satisfied that necessary improvements are outlined and delivered. We've considered the assurance provided and recommendations which the report makes. In this instance, mainly around the one item in the housing area, and we're looking forward to hearing later with a follow-up audit in that area in terms of the way that internal processes are checked to see that they're in place to prevent at least any further poor sort of administration, I suppose, of grant funds. So if I can say, I don't know if we've picked any specific actions.
I think just I guess in terms of the next progress report, which is due in January, I guess you wanted that specific matter of the risk-based approach to audit work on grants to feature as part of that next update, and also an indication of Herefordshire position relative to other authorities in terms of the effective management of grants. Another action was regarding the scope of the ICT governance framework review be provided to committee members. So that's an action.
Okay, thank you. Are we in agreement on those recommendations A, B and C? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ian. And if we move to agenda item 8, the annual governance statement 21-22. Purpose of this is to seek the view of the committee as to whether the annual government statement, the AGS 21-22, properly reflects the internal control environment the council is operating in and the appropriateness of actions identified to improve. We've seen the draft annual governance statement came to us in the last meeting, and I think we made a number of recommendations, and I suppose I'll pass to Rachel if you want to just confirm what's been included now. I think just about everything, and any other comment you want to make?
Thank you, Chair. Yep, following the last meeting of this committee when we presented the draft annual governance statement, we received some recommendations from members, and we've now finalised the annual governance statement, which includes an update to reflect a review of plain English, a statement against each principle to confirm the effectiveness of the arrangements. We've inserted some clarification around Hoople and also an update on children's services. So this version will now be subject to approval, published alongside the final version of the statement of accounts once approved by external audit.
Committee, any comments? Councillor Bolton?
You'll be pleased I have no detailed comments. I just want to say I think you've taken all of our comments on board, and the revised version is much better. So I just want to thank you for all your hard work and effort that's been undertaken.
Any other comments? In which case, can I suggest I table the recommendation that the committee determined The annual government statement for next one properly reflects the environment council operating in and the actions identified represent appropriate response. Are we all in agreement?
Yes.
Thank you. Agenda item 9, the 21-22 external audit findings report. The purpose of this is to consider the external auditor's audit finding report for the year ended 31st of March 2022. We have Appendix A, the audit findings for Herefordshire Council 21-22 included in the supplement. Appendix B, Grant Thornton's 21-22 audit progress pack, 14th of October 2022, also included in the main agenda pack. So we've had a supplement, which I think was published on Friday. We've got Pete Barber here from the audit partner from Grant Thornton. Our recommendations that we've got to consider: the report of the external auditor attached Appendix A be considered, and the committee determine whether any issues raised in the report require inclusion in the committee's future work plan. Pete, do you want to just highlight any issues that you want to bring to the attention of the committee, and then we'll ask the committee to ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. So this is our audit findings report that sets out our main conclusions arising from our 21-22 audit of the council. And as the Chair said, this was as of last Monday. Just to remind committee members that as your external auditors, our responsibilities are twofold. It's an opinion on your financial statements, and it's also a value for money conclusion. The audit findings report commences on page 17 of the supplementary pack, and if I start with the opinion, the post-statements audit of the 21-22 accounts commenced in June, so it was late June, and that was in accordance with our original timetable. You were one of our priority audits for this year, given your timely closure in previous years. So we made an early start. That was one of the first audits that we started across the country. And interestingly, we do have some 21-22 audits that haven't started yet. So that gives you a bit of context about the timelines involved in discharging our role. And I think that really reflects the fact that audits are now much more involved than they used to be, and they involve significantly more inputs from our side in terms of resources and challenge. And this consequence of that is that we also take up a lot more of your finance team's time in seeking responses to those queries and supplementary papers. And my reflection is, based on this report, that through good cooperation on both sides, we are well progressed on the 21-22 audit. And I suppose it probably would be helpful just to set out a bit of context, because I am conscious for this year, for 21-22, your then head of corporate finance, Josie, who had been responsible for accounts production for a number of years, left before the close down process concluded. I know that you brought in some interims, one of which had worked with you before, but another one to produce the financial statements. And then following the production of the accounts, I'm conscious that Rachel, as the incoming head of strategic finance, came in once the drafts had been produced, and in addition to us subjecting those draft accounts to challenge, I think it's fair to say that Rachel did that as well in terms of an extra layer of quality review during that post-statements visit. So I think that has resulted in what I would describe as a larger number of adjustments and changes to the accounts than we would normally come across. And that is a number of those areas have actually been identified in conjunction with Rachel this particular year. And I suppose what I will do in a minute is I'll talk to some of the more significant ones of those adjustments, particularly the material error and the prior period adjustment. So I think it's fair to say that your accounts have been subject to a very large degree of challenge this year, and more challenged areas that perhaps haven't been looked at in as much detail as in previous years. So just in terms of the summary position, this is set out on page 21 of your supplementary pack that's headed up. So actually it's on page 19, I said corrected, sorry, page 19 of your supplementary pack. In terms of the main issues arising, we were undertaking the work last week. So page 21 outlined a number of areas where work was in progress. Since then, we've made some further progress, because I'm conscious there are a number of bullet points there on page 21 that work remained in progress. So if I look down that list, from the bullet point that says that the private finance initiative note, that's at bullet point 6, all the way down to litigation of claims, which is towards the bottom, have now been concluded. We've got a little bit more work that we need to do on the going concern assumption. We've just sought a bit more information from finance colleagues with regard to Hoople, but a number of those outstanding areas have now been concluded, and we are close to completing the work. So importantly for the committee, since that work was undertaken in the last week, no additional errors or material uncertainty has been identified. So the report does summarise the totality of the issues arising. On page 19, we refer to the main findings, and I suppose the biggest one is in relation to a note within your accounts, and it is in relation to the reclassification of your share of the energy from waste plant, where alongside discussions with officers, following a challenge from us, you have moved your share of the energy from waste plant from land and buildings in the accounts to plant and equipment. And this reflects the accounts of Worcestershire County Council, who clearly you share the asset with, and reflects what I see elsewhere. I was at one time the auditor of Gloucestershire County Council, who also have an energy from waste plant, and these buildings tend to be a glorified structure, steel structure, and all the value of the plant is in the actual equipment underneath, for want of a better description, the corrugated roof. You had it in as land and buildings, that value, and now you've reclassified it as plant and equipment, which we're now comfortable with, and that is reflected in the updated set of accounts. Another related issue, and obviously that then had an impact on the previous year that was misstated. So what officers have done is they've gone back and they've reclassified the same issue for the prior period figures. The other issue that is semi-related is in relation to what we call your capital financing requirement. So this is a note, a complex technical note within your accounts. One of the elements of the capital financing requirement is the need to, when you make loans and they're repaid back, to write down the value of the capital financing requirement by the value of the repayments. As part of the establishing the energy from waste arrangement, you did, as did Worcestershire County Council, provide a loan at the outset to Mercia Waste. And what you hadn't been doing previously, and that was picked up by Rachel, was the need to actually, as that money was repaid, write down the capital financing reserve requirement. It wasn't actually material to the opening balances, and therefore to catch up and correct that adjustment has been made in the current year. So they are largely of a technical nature. Importantly, they don't affect the overall value of the assets that appear at the top of your balance sheet. So if you're a reader looking at your accounts, the figures that remain at the top of your balance sheet remain correct and give a correct indication of the value of the assets you hold. It's in the detailed note where those changes have been made. The other observation I wanted to make was in relation to other assets that you hold at the top of your balance sheet. You have a large number of assets that are used for operational delivery, and you also have what we call investment properties. And the definition of investment properties are assets that you own that are held purely for capital appreciation or income generation. We challenged again a number of these categorisations. There had been some changes between years that you've made, so we challenged this, and And following the challenge, some reclassifications have been made between land and buildings and investment properties. Interestingly, some went one way and some went the other way, and the net effect was actually that there wasn't particularly large change or no material change in the figures, but nonetheless those were wrong, and those have now been corrected in the revised accounts. So, as I said, the work is well progressed. We do have a bit more work that we just need to get over the line in relation to the assets and the investment properties. And I suppose also, as has been the case for a number of years across most audits that are well progressed at this time of the year, we still need to wait the receipt of the what we call the IAS 19, the pension note from the pension fund auditor. So Grant Thornton also do the, excuse me, Chair, sorry. Apologies. So Grant Thornton also undertake the pension fund audit at Worcestershire County Council. So we are waiting from colleagues to receive the letter of assurance from them. That is probably due mid-November. And then that will enable us then to conclude on the IAS 19 liability figure, which is a very large liability figure that appears in the bottom of your balance sheet. Members of this committee may also be aware that there is a national issue that is preventing any larger councils from being signed off for 21-22. So any council in the country that has material infrastructure, so this is your roads, your lands and your bridges, and that tends to be most unitaries and upper tier councils and Mets. There is a national issue there about the disclosure of the infrastructure carrying value in your accounts. It's been going on for some time. CIPFA have been seeking a solution to this. They brought a paper out a while back that didn't really address the issue, and on the back of the challenge to that paper have now sought a statutory override that would essentially remove infrastructure from the coverage of the audit. It changes on a daily basis, but the noise in the system is that something should come out towards the end of November. There will be a timeline before it can be approved by government. So we're probably looking around Christmas time for the statutory override to materialise, which realistically means that no audits for large councils will be signed off until early next year. I suppose our challenge is to make sure that everything else is done so that as soon as that comes out, we're able to proceed. And I would be optimistic and have an aspiration that as soon as that is released, we will be in a position to sign off and give a clean opinion on Herefordshire's 21-22 accounts. So that's the opinion. Just very briefly, just wanted to touch on value for money. It was only a few meetings ago of this committee that we presented the findings for the 2021 value for money work. Our aspiration is that we bring that forward again this year and report in a more timely manner, but we recognise that in our 2021 VFM report there were a number of criticisms of the arrangements at the council, and we do need to give the council a little bit of time to address those. So we have started that work, we're in the early stages, and the proposal is that we undertake the work and start in November. So we will do a lot of the work in November and December, and conclude early in the new year with hopefully issuing a draft report to officers for consideration at the end of January. So the only other observation probably for me before I take any questions is in relation to the sensitive area fees. So pages 51, 52 of our papers set out the fee position. You will see that the fees for 21-22 are yet to be determined, and this is because essentially the opinion work remains ongoing. Suffice to say that considerable extra time has gone in this year to discharging our opinion responsibilities. Clearly, we still need to complete the VFM work, and only when we've completed that work and the opinion will we be in a position to confirm the final fee. As is always the process, we were initially discussed that with the Section 151 officer, and then in due course, having agreed it with him, we will then bring it to this committee for information. And as ever, Any additional fees that we charge for the audit will be subject to PSAA approval, and they require us to submit returns justifying that additional fee, and only if and when they sign it off will we bill that extra fee. I am conscious that the committee only received this report just before the weekend. I'm conscious there's a lot of information in there. I'm conscious the appendices contain lots of detail about those adjustments made, but what I would say, that needs to be taken in the wider context of my introduction and the fact that there was only one material error, and that was a note and not in the prior statements, and that has been corrected in the revised accounts. So I'll stop there, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask a question in terms of the energy from waste plant and the reclassification of that asset from London buildings to plant and equipment. Does that then have any effect on any depreciation of that asset, and does that affect the balances at all?
I'm happy to defer to officers. My understanding is it doesn't. It's been treated in exactly the same way. It's just the categorisation that changes, not the
There's
value.
no impact on the depreciation. Each line within the note which shows the cost and depreciation and revaluation in year in respect of that asset has simply been shifted from one column to the other column, so no impact on the net book value of that asset.
Right. Okay. So that sort of brings on the next question, in that my anticipation would be that land and buildings had quite a long depreciated over quite a long period of time, 80 years or so, whereas plant and equipment would be 10 to 20 years, and therefore I would have expected a change.
So the depreciation is linked to the individual asset, not the category that it sits in. And for this particular asset, it's been revalued, I think 3 times now in the last 5 years. So the useful life of it is determined by
that's a really good
external
explanation. That's my mind at rest on that point. Thank you. Committee, any questions at all? Councillor Jim.
Yes, I'm grateful for a little bit more information around the point you were making that's yet to be determined with regard to assets in the nature of roads, etc. You implied that that was going to be part of a sort of future determination as to where it would sit. Obviously in Herefordshire, where we have a small population relative to a massive amount of roads, it's something that we're always very mindful of when it comes to the considerable difficulties that we have in maintaining those roads, and I'm just wondering how that's going to come out in terms of audit if that inclusion occurs in that way.
So the main issue with regard to infrastructure is the net position recorded in your account. So historically, and it's a bit of a generalisation, but what would happen is every year you would incur additional costs on repairing and maintaining and improving your infrastructure, or building a new bridge or a new road. That capital expenditure will be added, will be aggregated to your current infrastructure figure in your accounts. And every year you would be depreciating your infrastructure on a straight line basis. So money would be going into it every year and it would be reducing through depreciation. It's fair to say that the level of information held by council varies enormously, and some of these assets go back many years, and some of them are not componentised, so there's not different elements of an individual asset that is available within fixed asset registers, etc. The concern has been that, and this was raised by, so another firm of auditors elsewhere in the country was subject to a review of their audit approach by the FRC. The FRC were critical about how the auditors have got assurance over the figure for infrastructure in this set of accounts of this council. And the regulators were questioning whether the council and the auditors could demonstrate that the net position wasn't overstated, and a particular concern that, you know, if you put a new road surface on a road, how are you removing and writing out the existing surface, and how do you know it's been fully depreciated? Because if you don't know it's been fully depreciated, there's a risk of double counting. Because there might be some value in the initial repair and then further added on. So this is an issue. We've looked at this across all our councils, and to varying degrees, none of them have sufficiently accurate and complete records to be able to clearly demonstrate that the net position is correct. So the potential risk is, and all the other firms are reaching the same conclusion, the potential risk is that you just end up for all councils a qualification in their account saying the auditors can't get assurance over this figure. So SIFA were then involved. They came up with a proposal that was not fully accepted by the accounting regulators and how it's accounted for. And therefore, as a result of that, they've now taken the next decision, which is to seek approval from government to have a statutory override, which would essentially remove it from any auditor's opinion for a set period of time while further work can be done to see if there is a long-term solution to this. But it's a bit of a minefield. But you are not alone in this, and it's something that's facing every council that has any degree of infrastructure within their accounts.
Thank you. I mean, I think the problem I see is that the rate of degradation of the infrastructure is exceeding the rate at which it's being capable to be repaired. And that reflects the lack of money to be able to do it. Therefore, we know that value must be depreciated over time above the rate that you would expect. So how is that reflected into any accounting process?
Well, I think that would just be reflected. So if you are spending less money, so say you went a year without spending any money on infrastructure because you didn't have the money, the infrastructure value within your account would not be going up. It would be going down because there would be an annual depreciation charge levied on those existing assets.
Is that straight line then?
Yeah, so you would be actually having a lower infrastructure figure if that was the scenario. So what you're basically saying is that there's not enough money being made available to actually incur new capital expenditure on the infrastructure that is offsetting the depreciation that reflects the degradation.
Yeah.
So that is more of a service quality issue than a accounts issue in terms of what's in your accounts. That would not impact on the accounts disclosure, because the logic would be if that did happen, that scenario, your infrastructure figure would reduce because it's worth less because it's not been maintained.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't address your wider issue about the quality of the infrastructure that's available to users.
Okay, thank you. Just to confirm then, Appendix B of the report lists, I think, what we call progress, which effectively lists, if I'm interpreting it correctly, any changes made from the draft, our draft chart of accounts to the final chart of accounts, which is the one that we're looking at in the next agenda item.
Yes, Chair. So I'm looking at Appendix C, and I'm conscious I think you call them Appendix C. So I'm looking at page 44 onwards of the supplementary pack. So page 44 through to 49. Well, 50 actually. Detail the changes that have been made from the original draft that was submitted to the revised draft that you have on the next item on the agenda. So I think it's about 5 or 6 pages worth of changes.
Yeah, I've got them.
I'm looking at the number on the left-hand side of the page on the pack.
Lovely. Well, that's a help. Looking at the same sheet. So those are the actual only adjustments made in the chart of accounts. And we've already seen as a committee the chart of accounts, so we'll come on to that in the next agenda item. Thank you, just to clarify that. Any other questions for Audit? Yes, Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple really, and I suspect this is my steep learning curve I'm doing on audit rather than issues itself. Just thinking about the explanations for why we are a little bit behind in getting these papers, etc. And just noting also the fact that on page 19, you talked about your own process starting in late June. So I just wonder whether, as well as our processes, whether your start date was early enough. But in terms of the audit adjustments, particularly around PPE, I'm just wondering, because we've been duly reporting our assets in the same way for quite a long time, what it is that's prompted the change this year, and whether or not that is something to do with value for money and the new way that we do things, or is it your decision as grant authority to make those changes? Thank you.
Through you, Chair, if I may. So fully appreciate that the papers, the supplementary pack came out, I think it was on Friday. And this is a perennial challenge for us because clearly we want to give committee as up-to-date position as possible with as much of the audit progressed as possible when you receive the report. So in conjunction with officers, we decided to delay it as long as possible to make sure it was as complete as possible. Interestingly, the deadline that has been set nationally, that I suspect will be missed by almost every council, for signing off the accounts is the end of November. So we were planning to bring it to a November meeting of this committee, but clearly it's scheduled for the last day of October. So that did put us under a bit more pressure. I mean, in terms of the start date, you were my first audit to start at the end of June. I've got 9 that I do across local government. You were the first to start. Rachel will correct me again. I think the deadline for producing the draft accounts by officers was the end of July. So you have until the end of July. So really, most of our audits will only start in August because we wait for the accounts to be produced by officers. You produced them early here. I did talk earlier about the change in personnel involved in that. So we came in late June, a full month before when, in theory, the deadline for producing the accounts. So we made a good start. And you know, we are very well progressed. So of all my audits, this is the most progressed audit. But the fact remains that the audit process is so involved now that it takes up such an inordinate amount of resource for us that we cannot get all our audits done in a timely manner. So there will be a large number of our audits that roll forward considerably. We still have some 2021 audits that we haven't signed off. And it is becoming increasingly resource intense for your finance officers. So the audit process that used to last, say, 3 months is now elongated. There's a lot more challenge, a lot more work required by finance officers, you know, whilst they're simultaneously having to deal with beginning to prepare for the budget for 23-24 that will go to full council in February, whilst doing the day job as well in terms of that internal financial monitoring and reporting as well. So it is a complex process.
Thank you, and that I think just kind of reinforces what you were saying about the nature of the work that you guys, pressure of the nature of the work that you guys have been put under in this changing environment. And so thank you for that. And just a quick, for me, possibly not understanding how these things work, the audit adjustments on page 44, so Appendix C, of the PPE. Why we have them this year? And I don't seem to remember really seeing adjustments like this before.
Yeah, and I think my view on this is probably, I mean, I'm new to Herefordshire, so this is and Rachel's new. So when different people arrive at an audit for the first year, they focus on different areas. I think actually the people, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm sure Andrew and Rachel will do, because Josie wasn't producing the accounts and interim people were, they made some adjustments in their view as to whether assets should be investment properties or property, plants and equipment, I think then we looked at that because it was a departure from previous years. So we were saying that's part of our risk assessment. Why have they changed categorisation? There were further challenges, and then some of them went back again. So I think it was just different personnel on your side producing the accounts and different people on our side reviewing those and challenging. Suffice to say that I am absolutely comfortable with the categorisation that we have in place now that are reflected in your revised accounts. And I suppose, yes, it's important that they are properly categorised because there are different arrangements for valuing them. Invariably, investment properties are valued on a different basis than property, plant and equipment. Investment properties are based on yield or rents predominantly. They have to be revalued every year because they're deemed to be more volatile, whereas the other assets are valued in a different way. So that has a ramification as well. But importantly, it hasn't changed the overall carrying value, the amounts that appear in the top half of your balance sheet. It may be categorised differently, but it hasn't undermined the material accuracy of the accounts. Interestingly, some of the movements between the two offset themselves more by luck than anything else, I think. But the overall figures are fair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ginman.
Can I just clarify, obviously there's a section in here which you quite rightly referred to as fees. When we deal with this now, are we signing that off, or what is actually the situation with regard to that?
These are the GPC ones, aren't they?
Chair, through you if I can.
What page?
If you would do.
Yeah, so this, I think we're probably on 51 and 52 here of the supplementary pack. So the audit fee is based on a scale fee that was agreed at the beginning of the contract 4 years ago. And since then, you will all be cited that additional requirements have been imposed on us. You know, the most recent of which is the value for money change that took place last year. So there was a big uplift in your fee last year for value for money because it's a much more involved process. And that's, as you will see on page 52, that's in there. It's a big one. It's a big chunk of £40,000 because it's a real area of focus, particularly given the findings last year. But all the other lines as well are a reflection of the additional requirements imposed on us by the regulators, where we're going into much more detail than we've ever been done before. Public sector audit appointments who appoint us to Herefordshire recognise that, and these are consistent with what you would see at other councils. But ultimately, this is an indicative fee that was provided at the planning stage. And, you know, I know it's going to go up, but it's just until we've completed everything, and until we've done the VFM, because that's going to be pretty important to judge the price and the fee, we will hold fire and give you the total position once we've concluded all our work early in the new year. But as I said, it will go through Andrew to make sure that officers understand the basis of it. And even when we've brought it back to this committee, we won't actually bill it until public sector audit appointments have signed that off. What I would say is that there's one more year of the current contract, and then I suspect that the new contract, once that's let, will remove a lot of these additional uplifts, because the new contract will be based on the fact that those form part of the basis audit approach.
Thank you. That's a clarification. So when feel peace of mind, Councillor Gill, we're not signing off the bill at this stage, but it's an indication where the final account may arrive.
It's always good to know the auditors are audited.
We are.
Indeed. If there's no further questions, can I pass the two recommendations that we've considered that we've considered the report of the external auditor, and I don't think committee have raised any issues in the report to require inclusion in the committee's future work plan, although I did note that we've got a VFM report coming to us, which we haven't specifically got detailed, I don't think, in the work plan, although we've got external audit plan, auditor's annual report down for January. But interpreting that might include the VFM, but judging from what we're being told, as the report won't be delivered until the end of January. So it might either indicate a need for a February meeting or that report is considered in the March meeting. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So just for clarity, and I think it's not helpful, the title, but the Auditor's Annual Report is the document that summarises the VFM findings. So that second entry there in January, the Auditor's Annual Report 21-22, is an aspirational, I'm not sure when the meeting is in January, but that would be tight, but not beyond the realms of possibility. The external audit plan, I suspect that means the plan for 22-23, which I suspect might come to a later committee.
Right. So we'll leave. So I'll accept that what we've got in the work plan then will cover what you bring forward. It may or may not be ready for the January meeting, but VFM, yes, you're right, comes under the annual report. That may or may not be ready for the January meeting, but if it's not ready for the January meeting, we'll make a decision around that date, whether to postpone the meeting or to have an additional meeting in February or to move it to March. That's fine. There's no need to work anything into the work plan at the moment. Okay, are we happy with the recommendations to be taken?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And thank you for all of that. Agenda item 10, the 21-22 statement of accounts. And we've seen the draft statement of accounts and we spent some time examining those and raising questions, I think, as a supplement to the minutes as well. There are a number of questions I raised on those. Now, I'm going to read out the recommendations that we're being asked to pass because they are a little bit wordy, but worth going through, I think, in this instance. Recommendation that the committee recognises the technical reasons for not being able to sign off accounts at this meeting, to those which have been explained to us in respect of the standard requiring a statutory waiver to the current requirements. Following an update provided in writing by the Chief Finance Section 151 officer to the committee that there are no material changes or issues arising, that the chairperson, in consultation with the vice chairperson of the committee, be authorised to approve the final statement of accounts for the financial year ended 31st March 2022, assuming there are no material issues or disputed amendments remaining as advised by the external auditors, Grant Thornton. B, if there are any material adjustments or disputed changes to the audit findings report discussed at today's meeting, then the above recommendation will not be followed through and the statement of accounts for the year ended 31st March 2022 will be subject to approval at a future meeting of this committee. C, following approval by the chairperson in consultation with the vice chairperson and with prior notification of the committee as far as practicable, the chief finance officer be authorised to sign the letter of representation on behalf of the council. We've got a note prior to this explaining that the letter of representation for 21-22 cannot be issued without resolution of the technical issue in respect of the accounting treatment of infrastructure assets, which is currently being considered by SIPFA. It is expected that a decision on the accounting treatment will be published before the statutory deadline of the 30th of November 2022 to enable Grant Thornton to issue their audit opinion for 21-22. And as a result of these exceptional circumstances, to support the sign-off of the statutory accounts within the statutory deadline, it's proposed that the chairperson, in consultation with the vice chairperson, be authorised to sign off the accounts, assuming that there are no, well, it's not assuming, but it's on the basis that there are no material issues or disputed amendments, as advised by the external auditors, Grant Thornton. Are we all clear what we're being asked to confirm. Councillor Alderson.
Yes, and just for clarity, you talked about the November date then, but was it more likely going to be January? Was it from what I?
I think external audit were indicating perhaps by Christmas, which is, I think, the euphemism for early in the new year.
But not November.
I suspect it's unlikely that it's going to be coming in November from the latest information that.
No, it's not going to be November, I think it's, I think realistically we're looking at.
So I'm not quite sure if we need to update the note or it doesn't matter for the recommendations.
It doesn't matter for the recommendations.
It could be noted in the minutes of the meeting that we've had an update, which is likely to be the end of the year. The recommendations have been drafted in such a way, thank you, Rachel, that those don't need to be amended.
Okay. So are we happy to accept the recommendations as written? Just an indication. Yep. Okay, thank you. And no one's got any questions that they want to resurrect on the statement of accounts. No. Excellent. We'll move on. Item 11, the corporate risk register. So the purpose is to consider the status of the council's corporate risk register in order to monitor the effectiveness of risk management within the performance management framework. And I believe that Appy Reddy, Head of Corporate.
Chair, sorry, I'm afraid is unable to attend today. But Joanne Sumner, Director of Strategy, has kindly agreed to introduce the report, although they might be able to go into detail that we might want to, but Jack is on the line now. Thank you.
I'm not looking at who's on the virtual attendance, so I was unaware. But Joanne Sumner, Director of Strategy, then if you want to make any comments about the committee in relation to this report.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry I'm not able to join you in person, but so I'm Joanna Sumner, Interim Director of Strategy, here for a fixed term, working with the Chief Executive and CLT to do some work strengthening our approach to some of the corporate services, providing some capacity to help the organisation be more strategic, including about risk and improving the kind of council-wide oversight and leadership on risk and performance management. So Appy has been leading on bringing together better reporting on performance and risk, and I'm working with her on this to bring together a more kind of systematic framework for strategy, policy and planning, and making sure that we use evidence from risk and performance management in decision making, with and then introducing Power BI as the tool to help everyone do this. So you've got the corporate risk register from the end of September with the directorate risk registers here, which I think is a kind of slightly different from what you've seen before. And I think you kind of interested in our approach to strategic risk, and I'm working with Appy. She's putting together a corporate protocol around this, which will bring in greater consistency, a greater clarity about responsibility at different levels of the organisation, introducing a corporate challenge process around this, and an action plan on risk, all of which is not yet in place, but is towards the end of this calendar year. We will introducing all of this with CLT. So as was said, I'm not necessarily informed about all the detail in the report, but I can obviously take back any questions or comments to Appy, and certainly any questions or comments to me about how you'd see the kind of corporate strategic approach to risk improving. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne. Any questions from Councillor Balderson?
Thank you, Chair. And Joanna, really lovely to meet you, albeit virtually. I guess Action 91 and our Action Tracker does raise our concerns around sort of the strategic nature of the corporate risk register. I think historically we've identified that the risks, vertically can filter out quite well, but from a horizontal perspective, if I give an example, the recruitment strategy within corporate services, CS08, it's not in a corporate risk register yet. There are other recruitment and retention issues bubbling up from other areas, and so we're getting quite a siloed sort of look at the risks as opposed to a more strategic. Like if you added all those HR issues up across all the directorates, we might see a different picture. And I know action item number 91 was we had discussed with Paul Walker, but I think back in June or July, that the CLT were working on a strategic risk register, and it was something that potentially we could have sight of. Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the public domain, but it would be very useful. So it would be lovely to get more understanding about the direction of travel on that, Joanna, please.
Yeah, so so this hasn't been to CLT yet, and I think subject. I'll talk to Paul Walker about this, but we can bring something back to the committee once we've done that. And the plan was to do that, I think, in November. So at some point, perhaps in the new year, we could come back with that piece of work. So CLT are meeting to in early November to look at some of this stuff, like how we work across the silos, as you say, because I think it has been very directorate focused, and we're looking at the roles of individual members and of CLT and CLT collectively in kind of countering some of that silo ways of working in early November. So perhaps subject to your kind of timetable and agendas, we can come back within a couple of months to report back on that.
Great, thank you, Joanna. I have another question.
Well, before your next question, I'll ask one myself, which you may not be able to answer, Joanna, but I note a new corporate risk CR 73 in removal of the ring fence around public health budget. That's not something I was aware of, so perhaps I could get an indication where I can find out more information on that, Andrew, and also if I'd quite like to hear the Director of Public Health's response to the removal of his ring fence around his budget, and any concerns and risks that he'd be raising in relation to that. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. To remind the committee, the current ring fence grant from Government for Public Health is just over £9.5 million, so a significant amount of money that flows into the council on that. And it currently is ring fenced for public health matters. Now, Public Health England has now been replaced by two other agencies, UK Health Security Agency and the Office for Health Improvements and Disparities, and they define what is met by the criteria of public health interventions by local government. When you look at those definitions, we as a council probably spend £11–12 million a year on work that would meet their definition. So we spend more than our ring fence quite rightly on these matters for our residents and our businesses. The risk we face is government could remove that ring fence and then question what then happens. We would hope they will keep giving us £9.5 million a year. We'll make it some other revenue support, presumably. The risk then is of future budget settlements from government or local settlements, they chip away at that. We're still left with the obligation to deliver all of those services. So that's one of the risks that the council, all councils face, that by removing the ring fence and putting that grant into the pot of normal revenue support grants, it gets eroded over time, or it doesn't keep pace with inflation and it just stays a cash limited sum. So that's one of the risks that we face on that. The other risk that Matt was here, the Director of whether the council chooses to have a great influence of where that ring fence is spent on that. As you can imagine, we can spend many times over that ring fence on public health matters. There's always a process to identify what are the highest priorities. Maybe if you want to invite the Director of Public Health to a future meeting to have that conversation. It certainly has a lot more than you tell this one. So.
Thank you. Well, it clarifies at least that there has been no removal at this time, but considering what the risk of a removal might be in future. So
That was my
good deal
question.
of clarity.
I have no other questions, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? From Councillor Bartlett. Try to find the question.
Trying to find the question, yeah. No, what it is, I'm looking at the new risks that we've got around scent. And I noticed that they are referenced within the Children and Young People's Directorate Risk Register Appendix C, which is on 79. Starting on 79. It's, I guess, so these ones actually appear on page 80. So there's a, we're linking CF 11, 12, 13 to the corporate risk register on 75, 76 and 77. I'm just trying to understand how we're carrying three very similar risks in terms of this, or should these be kind of very much more taken on block? If that makes sense. And thinking very much about CF12 and educational statements, because this has been rumbling around for quite a while, hasn't it? And we had some outstanding internal swap reports, I think, if you remember from the last meeting, where we haven't had feedback to some of the updates. So I'm looking at this, and I'm just wondering whether or not yes, I suppose it's just making sure that they're taken together really, and they don't start sort of wandering off in separate directions. And I notice on the risk register for children itself, they are marked with a star, which as far as I remember is an escalation, isn't it, of a risk. So I think, I'm not sure whether that's a question, Joe, or whether that's just a note to myself to try and keep track of these three, as they seem to be re-morphing, relinking and making sure that we don't lose bits of it. So, sorry, a bit waffly, I'm afraid, but I'm just noting that.
No, thank you. One of the aspects obviously is that under the departmental registers, we don't see in any detail the litigation. I'm just looking to see in terms of where these have gone to the full corporate register. We do have litigation identified. None of the mitigations are seen to reduce effectively the risk score before controls, but that's in a way an ongoing comment. I won't say criticism, that's a bit harsh, but a comment from Audit and Risk is that we would anticipate to see risk score after controls be reduced, because there's an argument as to, well, why are you bothering to do any mitigation if it's not reducing your risk? Why are we spending resource and funding doing the mitigation if it has no apparent effect on the risk of the risk score? Now, I suspect that's a rather harsh criticism, that whatever mitigation we are taking is having some effect, but we don't often see it, or we don't. I'm just looking, CRR 70 showed some mitigation as to 71. But I suspect there is something in the standardisation of approach of different departments to how they understand that scoring, and perhaps Joanna, if you could, that could be something that we look at between now and January, and try and portray a better reflection of mitigation and the effect of mitigation on risk. I look forward to seeing something in that area. Councillor Ginman.
Chair, just to support you in your comment there, it always seems to me bizarre that if we're taking mitigating effects, well, it can't be mitigating if you've still got the risk at that same level. It's a sort of oxymoronic statement, isn't it, in a way? You would hope that the mitigation does have an effect. Otherwise, you question what indeed you've been doing in terms of that mitigation. And I think that then does beg a question of ensuring there's review of those that fall into that category.
Thank you. Councillor Audit.
Thank you. And just my final question is on the EE risk register. So this is EE 28 on page 84. And I'm kind of looking at Ben a bit here, actually, because we had some correspondence about whether or not the phosphate pollution in the low catchment should be widened to include the fact that it's not just the 5-year housing land supply that is an issue now. It is, in fact, the wider environmental issues of that river system itself. And that then also includes the fact that we have a failing river in the lake and in the Wye. And my understanding from several meetings ago was that we were going to look at either rewording or creating more of a reflection of the risk on the environmental impact of the river system itself.
Thanks, Councillor Bartlett. I think that's perhaps something that Abby might want to take back to the risk holder, because I think you're right in that some of the effects are now seem to affect more widely the economic situation for the county in terms of housing, etc. But also increased influence on perhaps those on travel and holiday situation in the region.
And if I may, Chair, as well, I think it would also reflect the fact that we've now had 2 or 3 well-supported council motions about our rivers, and the fact that we also now have a cabinet commission to.
Indeed, I mean, to some extent, the creation of the cabinet commission should be seen as a mitigation to the risk, so that could be reflected there. It's always tempting to talk about specific risks that we know information about, and we could probably be here until 5 o'clock at the end of the week talking about some of these. I just wanted to pick up on one more in terms of a new risk that has come in, CRR 78. Which no, it wasn't CRR 78, I think it was. What was I looking for? Bear with me while I find my reference. I just lost it again. Yeah, CRR 78. Yes, the comment on the impact of statutory direction, if we're unable to demonstrate and will meet the department's educational and DfE expectations to set out in the statutory notes to prove, then we can face more formal statutory information, risk of movement of children's services from the council's control into children's trust. That as a risk restriction, obviously, whatever mitigations there are in place, only gets a score of 20, which is in itself interesting. But I just wanted to ask the 151 officer whether the financial impact of such a situation is also recognised, if there is a financial impact on the council of such a situation occurring.
Thank you, Chair. If there was a position where we had to move to a children's trust, clearly there would be additional costs. But if we look at our budget for children's, that's seen increases over the years as well. So I don't think we've got the information to understand whether there will be a further budget increase or whether some of the temporary arrangements we put in place and the increases would have to continue. So you're right, there would be, but I think at this point we can't actually calculate whether there will be an additional financial impact. So that's what we already recognise.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you in that case. Joanna, did you want to come back at all on any of those items raised?
Just that I agree with you, but the point about the mitigation resulting in a different score. So I'll take that away as something to review the whole risk register with.
Yeah, I appreciate that we have step changes, so we don't sort of have any figures between 25 and 20 or 20 and 15, which kind of makes a problem because of the structure and the way that we score them. But it would be good to see a risk score after controls which is reduced, which is the general way risk registers work.
Indeed, yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, at the moment, thank you. So, do we have any recommendations? We don't think we had any specific recommendations.
Not specifically. I mean, if Vice Chair, we could have an action about inviting officers to review the EE28 in the context of the wider environmental and economic implications of the fossil issue, and mitigations identified. But it'd just be an action clearly it's still be for officers to determine how they treat that risk.
But at least we'd be picking up on the point made by the Vice Chair. I think that'll be good. Now, I've seen the risk register. We're due to see the corporate risk register again in November, which seems, given it's only 3 weeks away, it would seem and it can seem soon. But we're going to, and the strategic work won't be done by then. Is that right, Joanne?
Yeah, that's right.
So that work won't be completed until January. So what I suggest we do is we drop the corporate risk register as an item from November, and if the strategic work has been done by the time of the January meeting, at least we pencil it in for the January meeting this time. Is everybody happy with that? Yeah. Okay, excellent, thank you. In which case, we've got that to one action, but no recommendations. We're all happy with that? Yes. Good. Progressing then to agenda item 12, work programme update. The work programme update, now we've got a print out of that. And got a number of items for the November meeting. I understand the clerks following up the availability of the whistleblowing report for that meeting in November. But are there any comments or additions that the committee would like to make to the work programme? No. No. Yeah, we can always bring it back to advise the client.
Just one thought on that. I mean, clearly we're all in budget mode and trying to put budgets together. It's also fairly obvious from reading any national press that every council in the country is now in a situation of almost default budgets, of having major problems. There is a risk associated with that once we know what our own budget situation is. I just wonder where we capture that in terms of looking at the position that we're going to find ourselves in, what we do. And I know this is the purpose of audit, but it's still pertinent that we capture risk in terms of potential inability to fund services that we might desire, which whilst having to concentrate on statutory.
Thank you, Councillor Jimmer. I suppose through the chair, I'll direct that at 151 officer with the caveat that there's a good deal of decision involved by the administration on where budget is spent and how the allocated grants are targeted. But I can appreciate that the 151 officer has a problem every year in providing a balanced budget for his administration. I can suspect that this year the problem is probably exemplified further. I don't know, Andrew, do you want to say anything about that, or any mood music you're hearing going on?
Certainly, I'm Chair, I'm very happy to comment on that. Cabinet have considered a report recently about the scale of the budget challenges we're facing, and also it's been a scrutiny management board recently, and next year we're looking at about a £20 million gap based on our current workings. But there's, as you can imagine, an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes to look at how we address that gap. We also have the situation that there's a lack of clarity of what the government will or won't do in terms of support in the local government settlement. We've had a number of changes in minister. The last public announcement was Michael Gove, when he was the Secretary of State in June, July at the LGA conference, saying it will be a flat cash local government settlement for 2 years. He's now back as Secretary of State, and we're waiting a further announcement. We're also waiting for the fiscal event, which should have been today, is now the 17th. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty about the position of government, how it will weigh support in terms of grants, and how we can and can't deal with inflation. And I think as just come to on, it's widely being reported in the press that just about every upper tier and unitary council and unitaries can't balance their budget, their current plans, so we'll have to look at quite difficult choices to be made going through that process. And that we would like to see councils coming to just do statutory services. That again has a nuance. A lot of the services we might have a statutory obligation, but we have choices about how we deliver those services. So that's the sort of thing that's being worked through by the administration and by officers, and we're going back to Scrutiny Management Board. So we'd all like to be in a position to have much more clarity at this point. For various reasons we don't, so it's going to be a very difficult budget setting process for next year. Local government model, well, the model for funding local government, where it doesn't take into account inflation. You see the biggest pressure on our cost base is the impact of inflation.
So I think,
So I don't know how we capture that. But
expect more
take
risks
a risk.
appearing in the corporate register, I think, in short order if funding from government doesn't cover what we anticipate. Thank you. So just to move on then to our agenda item 13, the date of the next meeting. The next scheduled meeting is for Monday, the 21st of November 2022. The time at the moment noted at 2 p.m, but I believe we're trying to change that to 11 a.m. Is that right?
Yes, Chair, if members are minded to confirm that, then we'll bring that forward slightly just to aid other members of the committee. But yes, I think there's another event on at 10, so it'd be an 11 o'clock start.
So my apologies for that day.
Thank you.
11, not 10.
11, not 10. Not 11, not 2.
Oh.
So we keep it in the morning.
Sorry, Chair, I've got Zoom 10 o'clock.
Yeah, it will follow on from that Zoom. So if you want to come in, we'll ensure that people can Zoom at 10 o'clock.
Okay.
Unless if that's the
So come in for the Zoom, but stay here.
stay here then
Okay.
for the meeting.
Thank you.
Maybe they
So
can do
if that's all, then can I ask the live stream